Now, not all cells are independent of each other. Cells in multicellular organisms are linked together through structures called cell junctions. Now, this is important because as an organism gets larger, rather than having larger cells, a multicellular organism has more cells. So to get bigger, it's going to produce more cells rather than bigger ones. This is because cells rely on nutrients diffusing across the membrane. Remember that a membrane allows certain small gases and other uncharged molecules to pass directly through it. And some of these are really important for cell function, like oxygen. As a cell gets bigger, it has less surface area for every unit of volume inside of it, which means that as a cell gets large, it has less and less oxygen for those organelles inside that are going to need it to produce energy. In multicellular organisms, the cells that work together are often specialized for different functions. When we have cells grouped together with other cells that are similar in their structure, so they look similar, or are similar in their function, we call them a tissue. Within these tissues, our cells are going to be joined together. So a cell junction is a way that we connect cells to each other. Before we talk about the different types of cell junctions, though, let's talk about what surrounds these tissues and cells. So around these cells, we have something called the extracellular matrix, or ECM for short. So here we see a layer of cells, and here we see our extracellular matrix with some cells embedded in it. And the extracellular matrix is made up of a bunch of proteins and carbohydrates that give strength and structural support to tissues, help organize different tissues, separate them from each other, and also allow signals to pass between cells and between tissue types. If we look at these components a little more closely, we can see that some of our proteins, like collagen and other proteins, are going to give elasticity to a tissue, so the ability to sort of stretch them, as well as strength. So here in yellow, we would see a collagen fiber. We'll also have polysaccharides, so some sugars attached to these proteins that let the extracellular matrix hold water and resist compression. So if you press on the extracellular matrix, it'll only squish in a certain amount. And that's partially due to these polysaccharides in the matrix. Now, some of our types of cell junctions are going to involve the extracellular matrix. In anchoring junctions, which are particularly specialized for providing structural support, we're going to see that we attach the cytoskeleton inside cells to either the cytoskeleton in another cell or to those proteins in the extracellular matrix. So conceptually, we can actually kind of think of the extracellular matrix as being like the cytoskeleton, but outside the cells. So it's made of strands of proteins. The cytoskeleton is made of strands of proteins. They both help give shape and strength. So when we're identifying an anchoring junction, we want to identify pieces of the cytoskeleton. So in this particular picture, I'm just going to tell you, here in green, we have a component of the cytoskeleton. Here in red is another part of the cytoskeleton, and this fiber up here is our third part of the cytoskeleton. And without labels, you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell that, which is why I'm telling you here. So anchoring junctions are linking our cytoskeleton here in one cell to the cytoskeleton in a neighboring cell. So that would be this junction and this one. So we know this is part of our cytoskeleton, as is this. Or anchoring junctions can also link the cytoskeleton to the extracellular matrix here and here. So our extracellular matrix here in this image is represented by this sort of blue-green beige layer. So they haven't drawn the protein fibers in, but we could if we zoomed in. So here we see red fibers, so like these ones, on one side of our anchoring junction. And And here we see that we have proteins that link the cytoskeleton up with collagen fibers in the extracellular matrix. So this would be another way to represent an anchoring junction. So because these are linking up scaffolding inside the cell to scaffolding either in another cell or outside the cell, these are really going to provide a lot of strength to cells and kind of hold them up, hold them in place, hold their shape. Our next type of cell junction has a different sort of specialization. So cells that are linked together by tight junctions are forming a tight seal between the cells. This is done by basically sewing together the cell membranes with another type of protein that acts basically as a thread. So that's what we see here in purple-gray, here, and here in this larger image. So we can recognize this partially because of these sort of bubbles in the membrane that we're forming. The way a tight junction works is that we use these proteins to press membranes directly against each other and hold them tight so no solutes and potentially not even water are able to flow between the cells, which can be important because this forces molecules to move across the membrane on one side of the cell, and then if that molecule is traveling all the way through to the bloodstream, so this is a blood vessel here at the bottom, it would also have to travel through this basal membrane, this one on the bottom. Okay. Our third type of junction is called a gap junction. And a gap junction is really for communication. So in a gap junction, we have proteins that basically form pores or holes through the cell membrane. So we see those here on our larger image or here when we're zoomed in. And so a gap junction is going to connect the cytoplasm of one cell to the cytoplasm of a neighboring cell. And it's going to allow molecules to pass directly through, which is going to allow molecules to basically share things that are inside their cytoplasm with cells that touch each other.